Well, to be honest, I don't think it can be all bad. I mean, some of the myths, yeah, okay, lots of sheep go missing and things disappear, but I don't think they're all bad. The strange people who live just off the island. And they said, don't mess with them, for you will be sorry. Heed the warning of years gone before. And I think we can all learn a very important lesson from that creature. And they said, Bloody Mackenzie is coming for you. Tales, myths, legends, they pass down through time, and those stories still exist for a reason. Welcome to Extraordinary Stories podcast. Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. Okay. So this episode now. Oh, actually, do you know something? I'm going to mention something else just before I start that. A few people have got in touch with me to say this is weird. I don't know what's happening here. That they've heard bits of Extraordinary Stories podcast being played on the radio. Now, can anybody help me here? If you've gotten in touch with me and you've said this, can you get back in touch with me? Because here's the thing. Nobody's come and asked me for any permission to start using bits of my episodes on the radio. So I don't know how that's happening. Somebody's just got a hold of my episodes and thought, do you know what? I'll just play a bit of that out on the radio. And I'm like, yeah, well, the problem is I don't really listen to the radio, so I'm not even really sure what station it's being played on, what time of day it is. But honestly, 2 or 3 people now have been like, oh yeah, I came to the podcast because I heard it on the radio. Huh? Very bizarre. Anyway, if you know anything about that, please help me. So this episode. Now, I don't normally do a sort of Halloween episode. And when I was thinking about it, I was like, right, well, I could. I mean, what I could do is I could find a creepy Halloween gruesome murder story. And I thought, well, that's fine, right? But then that's what lots of other podcasts are doing at the moment because it's Halloween. So I thought, do you know what I'll do? I'll go in a different direction. Now, I'm not sure if you know this, but I'm Scottish. I might have mentioned it at some other stage. Well, I mean, if there's one thing that Scotland can give to the world other than haggis and the Bay City Rollers, it's mythology. Scottish folklore, and some of it's creepy, some of it's nice, some of it's batshit crazy, and some of it's just plain weird. Scotland really is a country that is steeped in myths, legends, ghosts, and gruesome tales. And partly it's because Scotland's very old. Very, very old indeed. And so those myths and those legends, they've been passed down through the years. They're studied And actually, they are the basis for a lot of horror films and gruesome tales. I should probably actually say Celtic mythology, shouldn't I? But then, nah, I don't really use the word Celtic, so I'm going to stick with Scottish, you know. Potato, potato. Tomato, tomata. Whatever the phrase is. Who cares? So, a few different stories for you in this episode. Not my normal style, but let's go with a bit of mythology. So, in order to get into the mood for this, I've set up recording in my dining hall. I've got my candles lit. I'm seated at a long table and the house is dark. And I suppose all I can say is try not to be too scared. I know my camp voice is utterly terrifying. Try not to let it scare you. Are you ready? Okay, let's go. That was me doing a ghost noise. Are you ready? Okay, let's go. Okay, let's start with Selkies. Okay, what are Selkies? Well, they belong to Scottish mythology and they are shapeshifters, creatures who are human on the inside but have the skin of a seal. So, they belong to the island of Orkney. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Orkney, let me explain. It's an island at the very, very north of Scotland. And Orkney's got about 20,000 people living on it, which is a really small, considering how vast an island it is. And so the tale of the Selkie folk have been passed down for years and years. And if you go to Orkney, someone will take you towards the water and they'll point out some seals who are swimming around in the water and they'll say, that's the Selkie folk, who when they come onto land, unzip their seal-like skin and take human form before they put their skin back on and dive into the water. So this story is called The Goodman of Wasteness. Wasteness is a place in Orkney. Now the Goodman, he was a young, handsome, athletic and very wealthy man who lived on the island of Orkney. And he owned a farm. And this farm, that's what gave him his wealth. It made him very, very wealthy. So he's in his early 20s. Now, with all that wealth and being a handsome man and being very athletic, it made him quite the target for many of the young females who lived on the island. And it'll come as no surprise to learn that many of the local unmarried girls had their sights set on Goodman. However, despite all their attention, Goodman was simply not interested in marriage. Not one little bit. And many of the Orcadian girls, Orcadians are people from Orkney, many of the Orcadian girls had tried lots of things to catch his eye and to get into his good graces, but none of them were successful. And so, as often is the way, what happens is the people of Orkney, they begin to sort of turn a bit on Goodman and they begin to have a bit of contempt for the fact that he spurns every advance of every girl. They begin to say sort of nasty things about him. They describe him as an old man in a young body. Old before his time. Evil. Nasty. And to them he'd committed the unpardonable sin of celibacy. Goodman, however, paid no attention to the words that these people spoke about him. He didn't care. He didn't give a flying fuck. These malicious people who had horrible things to say about him could take their opinions and get to fuck. He was not interested. When he was asked about why don't you take a wife, why aren't you interested, he said this. Goodman, not exactly the most woke opinions here. He said, women are like many other things in this weary world, only sent to trial men, and I have enough trials without being tried by a wife. If that old fool Adam had not been bewitched by his wife, he might still be in the Garden of Eden to this day. Okay, Goodman, whatever. So one day an old woman who hears him say this says to him, heed well what you say. You will maybe one day be bewitched yourself. Aye, says Goodman, and laughs at the old woman. Arrogant Goodman. I think that's how we should think of him. Now there's a day when Goodman is down by the water on the shore, and he looks out onto some rocks, and he sees a great number of Selkie folk lying on the rocks. And the Selkies are sunning themselves in their human form in the afternoon warmth of the sun. And he sees them jumping in and out of the water. And when they're on the rocks, they're all completely naked, with their skin white as snow. And their skins are lying nearby. So remember I told you this is what Selkies do. They unzip their seal skins and they lie on the rocks in human form. So Goodman, he creeps closer to where they are. And he's intrigued to see them up close. So as he creeps closer and closer, the excitement of seeing them means that he lets out this massive shriek. And as this happens, the Selkie folk, they quickly snatch up their sealskins and retreat to the safety of the sea. However, Goodman is quick, and he manages to seize one of the sealskins, and it belongs to one beautiful Selkie. So, standing in front of him is an absolutely beautiful female. And laughing to himself that he has her skin, Goodman turns on his heel and walks away whistling a merry tune. Now as he's walking away, he begins to hear crying and wailing, and it's coming from the woman behind. It's a pitiful howl of grief. She's holding out her arms and she's saying, "Oh, handsome man, if there is any mercy in your human heart, give me back my sealskin. I cannot live in the sea without it. I cannot live amongst my people. Please give me back my skin and let me return to my people." But Goodman is not a soft-hearted man and decides no. Because you see, he's beginning to feel something. He's beginning to feel a sort of passion for the woman. And no doubt a tingle in his pants region. This icy heart of his is beginning to melt with her absolute beauty. He says he wants her to come home with him. And she explains she can't come home with him because she has a Selkie husband and 2 small Selkie children, and she can't leave them behind. So Goodman sets about convincing her to come, live with him, be his wife. And she tries to say no, but what else can she do? He has her skin. So eventually, Goodman takes the reluctant woman home. She's got no choice. So they marry quickly, and she settles into being his wife. Over the next 10 years, she gives birth to 7 children, 4 boys and 3 girls. The children were said to be the most beautiful children on the whole island of Orkney. And she turns out to be a fantastic wife to Goodman. She's thrifty, she looks after the home and his farm. And to everyone looking at them, they would think they were just the happiest couple. But the truth was this: the wife had a heavy, heavy heart. She would spend hours gazing out at the sea. The weight in her heart was a longing and a sadness. She wanted to be back with her people. So there comes a day when she decides she has to do something about this longing. Goodman goes fishing one day, and 6 of the 7 children are out of the house. The youngest daughter stays behind because she has a sore foot and can't go out with her brothers and sisters. And as soon as everyone except for the youngest daughter are out of the house, the woman starts to search. She searches high and low, and she searches frantically. She can see that the sun is beginning to set. Goodman will be home soon, but she carries on her search. So watching her, her daughter says to her mother, "What are you looking for?" And the mother says, "Oh child, you must never tell your father. Do not tell him. But I am looking for a pretty skin with which I'm going to make you a shoe, and that will cure your sore foot." The child looks at her, not believing her. However, the child says this: "Mother, I know where you can find such a thing. One day when you were out and Father thought I was asleep, I saw him take a pretty skin, fold it up, and put it away in one of the cupboards high above the beds." When she heard this, she clapped for joy, and she rushed to the place that her daughter had described, and there she found her seal skin. This was it. After years, she could return to where she should be. She takes the skin and she runs to the shore, puts herself inside of it, and dives into the water, where she can return to her seal-like form. She swims out through the waves to where a Selkie man is waiting for her, and she greets him with delight. Reunited with her husband and her 2 kids. That evening, Goodman returns home and his wife is missing. He's not happy. The youngest child tells him about her mother finding something and running towards the water. Goodman realises the seal skin is gone. He runs down to the water and he sees the seals swimming in delight, and he screams loudly for his wife. Eventually, he gets into a little boat and he rows out towards where he first saw her all those years before. And she appears. She comes to the surface of the water. And she climbs on to a rock and unzips a part of the skin to show her face. He cries and he says, "My beautiful wife, come back to me." She says, "Goodman, you took me from my family, my husband and my children, and I need to live with them." And with that, she goes back into the water. Goodman is in a rage. Furious, he goes home and he comes up with a plan. The following day, he returns to the water. He gets into his little boat, and this time Goodman has with him a weapon, a heavy club. He rows to the same place and he calls for his wife. She appears from underneath the water and she asks what he wants. He tells her he wants to see her husband and her children. And so she obliges. She brings them to the surface. He edges close to them in his boat, pretending to look upon them with love and with interest. And there and then, Goodman clubs her husband and her 2 children to death. The Selkie woman cries and screams at the vicious murder of her family. And Goodman rows the boat away, having got his revenge. As she swims away, she warns Goodman of this. Revenge. And death will be her revenge. She says this to him: "Some shall be drowned, some shall fall from cliffs and slopes, and this shall continue until so many men have been lost that they will be able to link arms around the whole island of Orkney." Over the next few years, each of the human children she bore to Goodman, one by one, fall victim to an accident or a drowning and end up dead. The 7 human children are buried, leaving Goodman entirely alone. And even now, in 2020, when a person dies on the island of Orkney, or there is a drowning or an accident near the water, it is said to be the work of the Selkie woman's curse. Okay, that was the Selkie woman's curse. Don't mess with the Selkies, I think that's what we've learned, isn't it? Now, not all of the Selkie myths and legends end in death. There's actually some quite nice stories about a man who one day rescues some seal pups, and about 5 years later his kids get into an accident on the island and are rescued by the Selkies. I don't think they're entirely out for evil and out for badness. There are some nicer stories, but I thought, well, it's Halloween. Let's go for the slightly darker one. Okay, the next one's not necessarily a scary story or a dark legend, but it's proper Scottish stories handed down through time, and a lot of you will know it. It's a well-known Scottish legend, and it starts in 1850 with a gardener called John Gray. who arrives with his wife Jess and his son John into Edinburgh, or Edinburgh, as some Americans would say. So, John, when he arrives, is having a hard time finding work as a gardener. So, what does he do? Well, he decides he's going to join the Edinburgh police force as a night watchman. So he goes through all the tests and the drills, and before you know it, he becomes a police officer. I love thinking about what those late 1800s police outfits were. Those those really long trench coats and the funky hats. Yes, what a look. Now, the winters in Scotland, let me tell you, are long and dark and dreary. And it was no different in the 1800s. So John, he gets a bit bored on his own every evening out doing his police work, and he thinks, do you know what I'll do? I'll get myself a wee dog to join me. That's what I'll do. And a wee dog can keep me company on my police business and go around with me. So he gets himself a wee Skye Terrier. So these dogs come from the island of Skye in Scotland. They're very cute. Small little dogs. They've got hair over their eyes, pointy ears. Very, very cute. So he gets a wee dog and he calls it Bobby. And he jokes to the other police officers that Bobby is his watchdog when he's out doing his important police work. So wherever John goes on his police duties, Bobby goes too. They are never apart. Spring, summer, autumn, winter, Bobby the dog is by his owner's side. So as John starts to get a bit older, the toll of police work starts to really weigh heavily on him. And he's not the young man he used to be, and his health starts to fail. He gets colds and flus, and they take him out of work for periods of time. He has to spend weeks in bed recovering. And of course, all the while, Bobby the dog is by his side. Now his health starts to get worse, and eventually John comes down with tuberculosis. And at this time, there wasn't really a great level of treatment, and John sadly passes away at home in bed with his wife and Bobby his dog by his side. Now, that really should be the end of the story. And if it was, that would be a pretty unextraordinary story. But it's what happens next to Bobby the dog which makes it legendary. John is buried in Greyfriars Kirkyard, or graveyard, as it might be known elsewhere. John is buried, and of course his dog Bobby is at the funeral, and something strange happens. After the funeral, everyone leaves except Bobby the terrier. He will not leave the graveside of his master. He just refuses to move. Now, people try everything they can. They try getting some food to see if that'll make him move. Doesn't work. They try lifting him, and he just barks like mad until he gets put back down at the graveside. So the owners of the graveyard, they start to get annoyed. They start to get annoyed that this dog is constantly in the graveyard and they cannot seem to get rid of him. So what they do is they try lots of things. They put down the scent of a bigger animal, thinking that'll scare him away. Doesn't work. He will not move. And there's a few locals who've by now noticed that the dog is there every day, and they start to argue with the graveyard owners and say, look, leave the dog alone. Let him stay, let him stay there if he wants to, and we will help. So what happens is this. Local residents They build a little shelter for Bobby beside his master's grave. They erect something out of like wood and some sack material, and they create this little shelter. By now, the story of Bobby the Terrier, who won't leave the graveyard, is becoming a thing of local interest, and people begin to deliberately take a walk by the graveyard to see Bobby. You know, just like on their way to work, they're like, I think I'll just swing by the old Greyfriars graveyard just to see that wee dog. And each time, there he is. All day, every day, except for 1 o'clock. Now, I don't know if you know this, but in Edinburgh, every day at 1 p.m, regardless of the time of year, there is a gun fired from the top of Edinburgh Castle. Except for Sundays and Christmas Day, it goes off religiously. It's an old tradition to do with boats. An old what's that word? Martum? Ritual? No, not martum. What's the word? What is the word when it's to do with boats? Maritime? Something like that. Something like this. Anyway, it's way back from years before. It would signal the boats arriving. And so this 1 o'clock gunshot thing has always stuck. Even when you're in Edinburgh now, it's very weird because you just be walking about, like, you know, doing your shopping. You'll be like, I'll just go to Starbucks. Oh, I'll just pop to the shop. 1 o'clock, this massive gunshot goes off. You're like, what the fuck is that? Oh, yeah, that's right. I'm in Edinburgh. So, I mean, I'm making Edinburgh sound like it's still in the 1800s. It's really not. Anyway, the gunshot is important because when Bobby the dog hears the shot, it was the one and only time a day that he would leave the graveside. And what he would do is he would walk to a little local cafe. And in this little cafe, they would give Bobby his meal for the day. This little cafe just did it out of the kindness of their heart. They'd seen him looking a bit hungry one day. They'd given him some food. And now this just became his ritual. This is where he went to get his daily meal. So by now, the whole kind of... He's at the graveside, the 1 o'clock shots going off means people are gathering to watch him, and it's mad because 1 o'clock, when that gun goes off and he leaves to go and get his food, crowds of people follow the dog just to watch him go to this cafe, eat his food, and then come back to the graveside. So that's all fine, right? That's all just going on, and people in Edinburgh know who the dog is, they know the story. And then a law comes into place, which is going to cause problems. In 1867, a law is passed that requires all dogs to be licensed in the city or be destroyed. So this sends panic through people because, of course, the last thing they want is to see Bobby destroyed. So the Lord Provost of Edinburgh, and the Lord Provost is, it's kind of essentially the same as like a mayor or a governor, except in Scotland for some reason we call them a Lord Provost. I don't know why. That Lord Provost steps in and pays for Bobby's licence. He does that really because, you know, he's a nice guy is one of the reasons, but also because hundreds of locals turn up to his chambers demanding that Bobby be given a licence because the people of Edinburgh cannot bear the idea of the dog being killed. So, for the next few years, collectively, the locals take care of Bobby. People pass through the graveyard every day with little treats to play with him. Some come to take photographs, paint him, and throughout all this, Bobby's routine never changes. 23 hours a day in the graveyard, except for the 1 o'clock shot. Eventually, at the age of 16, Bobby starts to show signs of becoming unwell. He's starting to fade. Now, of course, everyone who's visiting him does what they can, but sadly one day, a visitor comes to visit Bobby and finds that he's dead. a few days later, there is a funeral for Bobby, which the city pay for. And there's a gravestone. Now, this isn't usual, but he gets buried in that same graveyard as his master. And this dog gets a massive headstone commissioned for him. The Council of Edinburgh are so moved by Bobby's determination to stay by his master's grave for 14 years that they commission Scotland's most well-known sculptor to make a statue of Bobby, which is placed in the graveyard. To this day, the statue and gravestone of Bobby are some of the most visited tourist attractions in Edinburgh. And I think I read that almost 10,000 people a year visit his resting place. And the statue of Bobby's nose has been rubbed so often that it's turned from grey to bronze. The gravestone that they commissioned for him reads this: "Here lies the body of Greyfriars Bobby. Died January 1872, 16 years old. Let his loyalty and devotion be a lesson to us all." There you go. I know a lot of people will know the Greyfriars Bobby story, but, it's always a nice one. Man, I was literally looking at this story thinking, oh my God, I have got the opposite dog to Greyfriars Bobby. I'm not kidding. Honestly, if I was to die, Alfie would be like, yeah, whatever, mate. I'm moving on. I don't care, I'm moving on up. I'm getting out of here. I don't know if I've talked about this before. I did try years ago. I've given up now. I tried when Alfie was a puppy to train him into what to do if I died. So I lay down on the living room floor in a really convincing I've died in the living room floor position, right? But I had one eye open just to see what he would do. Couldn't give a fuck. He literally, daft dog, came near me, sort of sniffed at me, and then went to bed. Yeah, doesn't care. Just I think he's thinking, oh man, how am I going to get my food now? Selfish. So that's a nice kind of warming tale from the Scottish stories. But the one I'm going to tell next, not so nice. I arrived at this because the story is partly set in the same graveyard which I've just discussed. The description of the man that I'm going to describe should sound like everything that a gentleman should be. George Mackenzie is a well-rounded, pleasant man. He's born in Scotland. He's educated at the University of Aberdeen. He spends time in France studying and then becomes a member of the Scottish Parliament by the time he's 28. So, he should be this fantastic, gentleman, lovely man, but he's not. George Mackenzie is a man not to be messed with. Fierce politician. And a man who would fight to get his point heard. A man, if you wanted something done, was just the fellow. Much like myself. No. When you hear what he gets up to, actually nothing like me. Now, in 1701, he becomes the Lord Advocate. Now, what this means is that you become like the senior officer for crime and punishment in your country. And along with this, he becomes Sir George Mackenzie. I get him. Now, known for his kind of no-nonsense, I'm a bad bastard of getting things done vibe, the then ruling monarch of Scotland, Charles II, hires him as his right-hand man. Now, Charles II, he's got some pretty awful views on life. Terrible, in fact. Basically, anyone who refused to swear their loyalty to him, or anyone who rejected the Church of Scotland, was to be killed. Charles II was not messing about. Off with the heads. And if you didn't follow his religious views or show your loyalty to him, you were about to be dead. And so for such a job, he would need a determined man who would be his eyes and ears to help him. And Sir George Mackenzie was just that fellow. So before long, George Mackenzie sets out doing the king's bidding. He will kill literally any man, woman or child in Scotland who doesn't follow the rules. Now at first this is like one or two people here and there, and then a sort of bloodlust takes over Mackenzie, and he starts to round up more and more people to die. He would bring them from all over Scotland to Edinburgh, and he would have them killed inside of the king's castle, and then their bodies disposed of. Eventually starts to get a nickname, and that is Bloody Mackenzie. That's bloody as in, he's quite a bloody person who likes a lot of blood, not bloody as in, oh no man, I've dropped my bloody phone. You know what I'm saying? Get the difference? Bloody Mackenzie starts gathering 50 to 100 people at a time. And when he has them captured, he subjects people to the most inhumane practices. It's moved on from just capturing to kill. Instead, he wants to really torture people. So he exposes his captives to harsh weather conditions where they stand naked in freezing Scottish winters, and he starves them and he beats them. Now the numbers of people that he's capturing increases, and at one point he has over 1,000 people captured, but nowhere to put them. So he orders a makeshift prison, and it's to be built where there is a bit of land in the Greyfriars graveyard, where we just were a minute ago, home of Bobby the dog. So the makeshift prison becomes known as the Greyfriars Prison, and over the next 5 years, Bloody Mackenzie will go on such a rampage that he eventually kills over 18,000 Scottish people. They're captured, tortured and killed in Edinburgh. And this time is called the Killing Time in Scottish history. It's one of the worst periods in Scottish history. Bloody Mackenzie is eventually stopped by the royal family, who realise that he is completely out of control. This bloodlust is out of control. And they're pretty sure that their message about following the Church of Scotland has been heard loud and clear. It pretty much is follow us or Bloody Mackenzie is coming for you. In 1691, Bloody Mackenzie dies and he's buried in Greyfriars graveyard. That same place that he had created a prison. His grave becomes known as the Black Grave of Death. And so the story of Bloody Mackenzie gets passed down through generation, and this is what comes with it. Over the years, people will say there is odd goings on in the graveyard late at night, and that noises can be heard coming from the graveyard. And of course, it becomes a local legend, and myths are created around the ghost of Bloody Mackenzie. They say he rises at night looking for victims, his bloodlust not finished. Bloody Mackenzie is coming for you, are the words spoken by locals. And this becomes a scary thing to say to children to frighten them. Bloody Mackenzie is coming for you. I mean, it's all right, that one. It's not. It's hardly. What's that one from? What's his Coop Freddy Krueger? What's that one? 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. 3, 4, better knock on the door. I mean, I've given it a bit of a jazzy kind of, slightly jazz beat there, but you know the one I mean. I mean, it might be slightly creepier. Not my version of it, but it just might be slightly creepier. So, this story is centuries old, but let's go to the 1990s, where a series of odd things begin to happen. So there's a homeless man in Edinburgh, and he wanders into the graveyard looking for somewhere to take a bit of shelter one night. And as he's walking around the graveyard, he feels himself get pushed into a dark pit in the graveyard. And when he's lying there, he says that all he can smell is the stench of death, and he can hear screaming, and he has to use all of his strength and energy basically to climb up out of the dark pit. Not long after this, 2 visitors to the same graveyard are walking around when they feel a sudden blast of cold air, and both of them wake up unconscious on the other side of the graveyard with bruises around their neck like they've been choked. Bloody Mackenzie. Edinburgh police have over 600 stories filed away that all involve being attacked in that graveyard. People have ended up with bruises, burns, lacerations, gouge marks to their face. Odd sounds and odd noises can still be heard at night. Now, it's a tricky one, because we know that, some people do believe in it, in haunted places, and some people don't, and the whole, it's a cursed graveyard thing. And then, there's certain things that just make people question what they believe. In the year 2000, a man called Colin Grant, who is a spiritualist, he has a great belief in the ghostly goings-on, and he decides he's going to perform an exorcism in Greyfriars Graveyard to rid the world of Bloody Mackenzie. So when he's there to do this, he reports that he feels the energy of the ghost pushing back against him and resisting the exorcism, and he receives these blows to the face from a seemingly invisible force. And so he leaves the graveyard in fright. The exorcism doesn't work. That same evening, in otherwise perfect health, Colin Grant dies of a sudden heart attack. For the next 3 months after this, there are no reports of goings-on at the graveyard. And then slowly, the reports begin again. Noises made. Strange goings-on. 6 months ago, just 6 months ago, a woman was visiting the graveyard in the evening, and she describes what she felt was like a punch to the back of her skull, which knocked her to the ground and knocked her out for over an hour. When she woke up, there was no one in sight. She went to police, and Edinburgh police added it to their Bloody Mackenzie file. And so, if in 2020, or in the years to come, you're ever in Edinburgh, and you're ever near that graveyard, just remember that Bloody Mackenzie is coming for you. And so ends the story. Alright then, well, I hope you enjoyed our little tour of Scottish mythology. This is good practice. Maybe one day I'll do a spin-off, the Scottish mythology podcast with Barry Henderson. It'll be very informative, very exciting. Sounds like something a historian would work on. Don't know why a historian would have that voice. Okay, yeah. So that's it. That's your little Halloweeny sort of stories. I hope everyone's had a nice Halloween. If you dressed up, I'm sure you looked fabulous. Maybe you wouldn't have looked as fabulous as the time I dressed up as Mary Poppins, but I'm sure you looked great. Okay? Until the next episode, I'm out of here. Don't get eaten by a ghost. Okay? Goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over. Let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over.